Welcome, everybody, and especially welcome to Ben.
Thank you.
Who's joining us this morning to do the talk for us. So when I first started doing the travel talk in 2000, one of the first talks we did was about SPANA, which is the organization Ben works for. But in those days, what they did, they posted me a selection of slides with a commentary and I delivered it myself in the hall at the Adult Education College. I'm sorry we've waited 20 years to have some more information. I'm sure some of you follow the work of SPANA. But anyway, we're very glad to have you, Ben, and we will hand over to you, and welcome also to people who are joining us on the recorded version on YouTube. So welcome everyone and enjoy. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Patricia, and thank you, Peter, as well for inviting me. And welcome to everybody. I can see Ralph, Wendy, Peter, and Jean, and I'm sure I saw a name Liz there as well pop up. So nice to meet you all in this strange circumstances. But yeah, lovely to see you all. So yeah, my name's Ben Sturgeon. I'm what's called the Director of Services at SPANA, which basically means I look after veterinary projects, education projects, community training projects, some emergency projects. We run projects in about 33 countries around the world, and we've run approximately 50 to 60 projects globally dedicated to improving the welfare of working animals globally. So first thing I'll show you is a quick video.
Welcome to One Amazing Minute from Charitable Travel. Ready? Here we go.
Over 1 billion people across the world depend on their working animals. One working animal can support a community of up to 30 people. But if the animal can't work, the family doesn't eat. There are over 200 million working animals around the world, and only the lucky few have access to veterinary care. This year alone, SPANA have provided over 200,000 veterinary treatments to working animals in developing countries. Over the next 5 years, our ambition is to help even more animals in new countries as we continue to develop a better future for working animals across the world. SPANA's vision is a world where every working animal lives a life free from suffering and is treated with compassion. SPANA receives no government funding, and we rely on donations from supporters to continue our crucial work. Since 1923, we've been creating a sustainable future for working animals. Help us to continue this work. To find out more, please visit our website.
Grand. So that video was made back in 2017, where it said we treated about 200,000 animals. That number is now just under 500,000 animals a year. And again, as you kind of just got from that little short clip, there are huge numbers of working animals globally. I think looking around the room, perhaps it's unfair of me to say some of you may even remember working animals, and there's a picture on your screen now on the bottom left. You may remember this TV show. I certainly remember it, as a kid. In Britain, certainly, many years ago, perhaps, 50 years ago, was still reliant upon working animals. We had pit ponies, we had, horses pulling, carts, we had animals pulling trams, etc. There were working animals were a standard part of our lives, and many of us sort of experienced that. If you've had a cup of coffee this morning or a cup of tea, the product of that cup may have actually started on the back of a working animal. Tea leaves picked in India often end up on the back of a donkey before it gets taken for actual processing, and the same with coffee beans. And we can include lots of other products within that, whether that's bananas through to ginger and nuts. All kinds of things start their lives on a working animal. But certainly in the country we're in now, we've slightly lost sight of what a working animal is. we tend to think of working animals as being guide dogs or dogs that work in the army, for example. But there are a huge variety globally, as you've just heard. So just to give you some ideas, this is from Mauritania, and this is from the capital city, Nouakchott in Mauritania. And these donkeys are used to deliver water to people. The population there is just over 1 million. It's a very diverse population, and there is no piped water into that city. And people earn their living through collecting water from water collection spots and delivering them across the actual city itself. So that's in Mauritania. This is from Mali in Bamako. And again, working animals are used as the rubbish collection tips. So they go around the city, they collect the refuse, and they take the huge rubbish tips across the actual city itself, where they deposit it, as well as carrying other things such as produce, water, firewood, etc. So that's the working life of animals in Mali. And again, perhaps a little bit more kind of closer to home, I suppose. This is in Kurdistan in 2019, where this particular horse, the family fled uprising of ISIS in Mosul, and they used the family horse to escape that uprising, and now also use that animal for collecting firewood, water, for transporting goods, etc. So animals have a very diverse working lifespan. But it's not just equids that we see. We see a huge variety of work going on. This bottom left picture is from Ethiopia. You can see a horse being called a Gari horse being used in Ethiopia. We can see camels being used in the brick industry. And again, this is from Mali, the donkeys working on the rubbish tips. And we also have oxen. These are ceremonial oxen used in weddings, but obviously oxen will be used for ploughing, for collecting rice, for example, in Thailand. Again, oxen are very much used for agricultural work. And lastly, we see elephants being used for work. This is logging in Myanmar, and the elephants, are very much involved in moving these, huge kind of logs from process to process for use in general industry as well. So it's a multi-species, multiple species are used in multiple roles to support quite literally millions of people. As the film suggested, there's upwards of 200 to 250 million working animals globally, and they are supporting people very much in low-income countries, supporting upwards of 750 million people globally. And as I say, there are some things where they're actually supporting us as well in the UK. So what we really have when we start thinking of working animals are two things that animals actually do. They provide what's called a total economic value to people and to countries. So what I've really just written down here is that just examples of that. So for example, in Tanzania, donkeys carry ginger, they carry fish, and an average donkey earns for someone in a week about $12 a week. That's the income they generate from using their donkeys. In Myanmar, from ploughing fields, from collecting rice, they earn about $1 per day, so about $7 a week. In Kenya, they actually create an average overall yearly income of just over $2,000. And in Ethiopia, working donkeys again provide about $300 per annum for that person. So they provide a total economic income for the person who owns that. And they also provide social income as well, a social status. So these animals enable people to do very basic things, in terms of collecting water, firewood, and going to markets, taking children to school, taking people to hospitals, being able to work with communities and visit communities. And they're actually a social asset to people. People who have working animals are seen as a higher social status. People without them are very much having to work much harder. They're having to walk miles to collect the water, miles to collect firewood to bring it back. And they are very much seen on that lower social scale. And actually because they don't have a working animal, have a much reduced income at the same time. So the two are quite closely linked. What you'll see on the right are just some kind of examples of that, really, of comparing people basically with animals. You'll see on the top one a human carrying, for example, firewood or water The cost per that on average is about 340 rands per day. This is in South Africa. But if they use the donkey, they save 315. So the cost is a massive saving. Okay. If they're cultivating things, again, human labor costing 41,000 just to create, to plow land with hoes. Again, they almost save the entire amount when they're using a working animal. So these animals provide a massive human saving, income saving, and human labor hours that is very, very important. If we save hours for people, they can then dedicate that to family work, to better income generation, to improving their status within the community. So they have multiple roles, but we can loosely break them into these two things: an economic input and a social input into people. They also have a much wider effect. What I've shown you here is what's called the Sustainable Development Goals. These were developed by the United Nations about 5 years ago, and they are goals that are aimed at being reached by 2030. And there are 17 key goals, and the whole of the UN is signed up to it, so that means us as well. And effectively these are, as I've said, they're a blueprint for a sustainable future. You can see the number 1 there is no poverty, number 2, zero hunger, 3, good health and well-being, and there are a number of effective goals that are wanting to be achieved globally to affect these things. So we want to reduce poverty, we want to improve the environment, we want to improve the climate, we want to have better education, we want gender equality, we want an improvement of life on land and protection of resources. And these goals have been signed up to by the entirety of the UN to be reached by 2030. And working animals have a large input into reaching these sustainable development goals. So a working animal inputs into sustainable goal number 1 and number 8 through no poverty and decent work, simply by providing an income, a sustainable income for people who use those animals. They enable people to actually plow a field, to plant a crop, to collect that crop, to take it to market. They allow people to collect firewood and water in a much more efficient way instead of walking, again, to enable them to have effectively free time to generate income. So they strengthen the livelihoods of those people. Sustainable Development Goals 3 and 6 are health and well-being and clean water and sanitation. And effectively, these animals allow people access to vital services. So again, they reduce the physical toil on people. They enable people to develop an income. They better enable collection of clean water and distribution, as you saw in Mauritania. Zero hunger, decent work, climate action. And as we've kind of seen there, these animals build resilience. The use of these animals is more sustainable than using a tractor in one of these developmental countries. They are able to generate their own foods through a sustainable use of land instead of just gross climate change through use of tractors, fertilizers, etc. So they're a far better and more sensitive tool to use with regards to the climate and the land that the people are reliant upon. As we just mentioned there, life on land. They provide environmental protection. They live longer than a tractor will last in many of these countries. They are not ploughing deep soil where they are only generating small amounts of turnover of the land. They are refertilizing the land by use of their own dung and manure as the animals are used in the farmlands. We create zero hunger by introducing these animals, by allowing an income, by feeding waste crops to these animals, and again, obviously, then provide responsible consumption of foods for people and production where we're not overproducing, etc. Provide gender equality. As mentioned, many of the household chores, such as collecting water or firewood, fall upon women to actually undertake. There's a saying, I think it's in Ethiopia, where if you don't have a donkey, you are the donkey. And that's simply because people have to go and collect their water and firewood and other produce. And without having a donkey or a horse or an oxen, the people themselves have to do it. Having a working animal, again, frees up time. It has been shown that women with working animals have more time to integrate with other women, to undergo learning, to have their children at school, etc. So it's very, very important for them. As I've just mentioned, Working animals are often used simply to take children to school. They provide education opportunities for them, and it's a very vital aspect of what they do. And lastly, we encourage, or working animals encourage and promote partnerships. You will find many communities rely on whole populations of working animals. A whole community will work together during ploughing time through to harvest time and taking crops to market. And so it promotes these inter-community relationships and developing a whole community to build resilience within that community. So working animals play a huge part in trying to reach these global sustainable developmental goals. They contribute there, as you can see, roughly speaking, 12 of the 17 key goals that are deemed as vital for human health in the future. So they're pretty important, as you can probably see. So 12 of the 17. But as we touched on straight away, they're often also invisible. Many of us don't know about these working animals. We don't know there are 250 million working animals in the world supporting the lives of, nearly 1 billion people on this planet. We don't know about them. And they're very much viewed as this invisible workforce, which, however, millions and millions of people rely upon. It is because the majority reside in low-income net food importing countries. 75% of the world's equid population is working. If you compare that to the UK, there are probably 0 working animals within the UK. There are a few, I have to say, there are still a few traditional horse owners who will use horses to clear woods where the ground is extremely boggy, for example. But compared to this country, the numbers are minuscule. 75% of the world's traction energy is provided by working equids. Imagine that the world's traction energy, tractors, trucks, taxis, carts, etc., 75% of that is provided by animals, not by machinery. So they have a huge role to play. Over 95% of the donkeys globally are working animals. Again, in this country, I don't think I've ever seen a working donkey. I think all I've ever seen is somebody attaching a cart to the back of it for a bit of fun and kind of going for a ride on it. So again, a huge difference from what we see in this country to overseas. And globally, less than 1% of working animals effectively are supported by vets. Almost every single vet within the UK will be treating, obviously, cats, dogs, horses, etc., that are used effectively or are pets for people. And almost none of the animals that are working and require veterinary care through the type of work that they do ever have the opportunity of seeing a vet or being examined. So they're very much invisible to what is to us, and very much also invisible to people overseas. But as you can see there, the numbers are huge. The input that they undertake is huge. The impact that they have is huge. So there, they have a pretty important role for people. So again, the numbers, 750 of a billion people rely upon them, 200 to 250 million animals. I'm afraid I can't see you, as I say, but it'd be nice to ask you how much financial support do you think they actually get? And I think you could probably all guess it. It's 0. There is no financial support for these animals, either within the governments within those countries or very much, externally. And I've already kind of touched on these figures as well. 80% of people, these are direct examples we have collected. 80% of people in Mali state their income is linked to their working animals, and 43% have no other form of important. 73% in a village or an area called Shashamene in Ethiopia use these working animals for their agricultural activities and carrying produce to market, and is their sole source of income. 80% of animals, 80% of people in Siliana, this is in northern Tunisia, use working animals simply to carry water. As you see that little pop-up that just came down there, donkeys support the livelihood of 500 million people. That's a huge number, huge number. And it's global, as I say, it's global. It is across the world, huge numbers of animals doing all kinds of different roles, being exposed to all kinds of problems, but they are invisible, invariably, to governments and to people outside of those countries. So another video for you. This is, as you can see, they're from the Imlil Mountains in Morocco. This is one of my favorite videos. I hope it won't be too jerky, and there is subtitles here, which I hope will kind of stay in line with the actual video itself.
المعاشة ديال هنا راه واعرة شوية. القضية ديال الوعر ديالو ياك عرفتي، إلا ما خدمتي شوية باش تجيب شوية وكاين الناس اللي تيديروا غير المعاز، وكاين اللي تيدير شوية الفلاحة، وكاين الناس اللي تيعيشوا غير المهم البركة صافي. تنخدم غير في هاد البغلة، والبغلة ديالي والبغلة السمية ديالو حميدة، راه السمية ديالي حسن. تنخدم في البغلة في مليل في المغرب. عرفتي المشكل دابا إلا عندك البغلة تتعاون شوية، إلا ما عندك البغلة شوية تتمرد. راه تجيب شوية الدراري هاد البغلة اللي هزو راه في المدرسة، في كلشي، في الحوايج ديالو، في العيد، في كلشي. راه هاد البغلة اللي تنجيبو هداك الشي. عندها دابا نيت هاد البغلة راه ما تنهزو بزاف مع الثقل، ما تنهزو الحجر والكياس اللي عرفتي. راه المهم تنرتو شوية راه تتعاونني في هداك الشي. إلا تكرفستي في البغلة زيرتيه وتهزو اللي ما راه تيفكي من هاد البلايص. اما القضية ديال الشهرية وهداك الشي راه معندناش صباح عرفتي. باش تشوف غادي لا كيس ولا شي حاجة ولا الخدمة ولا راه والو، غير بنادم تيتكل تينوض من الدار يخرج يتكل على الله، راه بحال بنادم اللي مشاو للموقف. يلا يا وسمحت اللوح وانا ديتر لجيريت لي مامتا. هنا ما كاين الطريق ديال الطوموبيل، كاين غير الطريق ديال البغال وجزو الباكاج ديالك صافي. هذاك الشيء اللي تيديرو بنادم. راه عندنا واحد قريبا 3 شهور ولا 4 شهور ياك عرفتي. راه القضية هنا راه قاصحة شوية. اللي راه طايحة البغلة طايحة غير في الطريق وضربوا واحد الحجر، واللي داول تما راه قال لك اودي راه ما مهرسة. راه الجمعية اللي داو هذاك الشيء، الجمعية اللي تيديو البغا اللي مريضين هنا ولا اللي مهرس ولا اللي تيح في شي بلاصة راه غدا بيه. راه خيطوا هذاك الشيء، داروا الخصمة ورجعوا تيتهلاو في مالين البغال. راه سبانا اللي تيجيبو هذاك الشيء. هنا الا ما صبرتي ما غتعيش هنا. مرة هاك وتتقطع هذاك الشيء، تتعطيه شوية العلف البغلة وتتعطيه تاكل شوية وتتعطيه شوية البغلة. اما راه الخدمة ديالو راه قاصحة.
So what that video hopefully would have showed you, maybe we can put it on in a separate way for YouTube, is that people are dependent upon animals basically, and there's a huge dependency upon them. And this is, remember, in people who have no access to things we very much take for granted. They don't have access to veterinary care. They don't have access to human care either. They don't have legal representation. They don't have general infrastructural support, whether that's housing associations, transport, access to jobs, education, employment, social care, etc. They don't have access to any of that. So they're very much dependent on external help or through helping themselves. So because of that, what we tend to see, and again, hopefully this video will work, even if it doesn't, we'll keep playing because it's very short anyway. And you may have to twist your head around to see this, because I took this video standing on a wall, and this is in Mali, and this will just give you an idea of what we face when we turn up, because people have nothing, and when they're given the opportunity to access some of these services, they come en masse. So hopefully this top right hand video will show you that. So I'll play that again. So that is very typical of what we see when we turn up to a community or a village, that kind of presentation of huge numbers of animals and huge numbers of people, because they otherwise have no access to the kind of typical care that we very much take for granted. So that's very, very typical. That was taken about 7:30 in the morning. People had traveled from miles around, quite literally, to attend the clinic that we were supplying. They, as you can imagine, there are hundreds of animals and people trying to seek help for their animals, because they understand that the benefit that they actually give them. And why do we see these problems? Technically, it's called intersectional weakness. Intersectional weakness is a mass of issues that occur often in these developmental countries, and that is weak governance. I have to say we see a bit of weak governance in this country as well, but it's all the other things that come into it: lack of social care, poor education or no education, low employment levels, etc. And when you have that intersectional weakness, that hotbed of problems within the country, that's why you start seeing all these issues. You see animal welfare disease, conditions, you see predisposition to endemic disease, such as influenza, such as all kinds of different things that are going on. You see social inequalities, you see knowledge deficits within communities and in professionals. You are more vulnerable to emergent disasters, whether that be climatic, whereas we've seen this year with emerging infectious disease, you see poor development of communities and people and huge inequalities between them. So we see this kind of hotbed of conditions, you know, because of lack of governance, lack of income, etc., that predisposes to a multiplicity of issues. And as I say, as well as being exposed to all kinds of other things, climatic extremes, whether that be drought or flooding. We see social and political unrest in these countries. We see global marketplaces, such as right now with COVID affecting. These have huge knock-on effects for all of these people. And how do we actually see this? What do we actually see? So you can look at this in a very academic way. And so these are two results. Again, you've heard of these areas before. This is on the left, it's Siliana in Tunisia, and on the right, Segu in the south of the country in Mali. And we can assess these things based on some very simple things. So we can look at, for example, a poverty index. So we know often in these regions, people have a very low salary, and there is a poverty index that you can look up and see whether people are above or below the actual poverty income. We can look at whether they have access to any social or veterinary care, kind of in the bottom left down here on vet care. We can actually see what kind of terrain they live in, what access they have to services, so whether it's extremely mountainous or drought ridden, whether they get access to water. And we can look at the animals themselves, and we can look at basic welfare scores, where everything from wounds through to lameness, through to ocular disease, etc. And we can you know, pretty much get an idea of the type of problems that we're going to see. And these are just quite simple academic exercises you can do, and you will estimate the kind of problems that you will see. But there are really, you know, that's an academic exercise. What we really see are more significant things. And I've just put the last slide up, says there are some in the next kind of 4 or 5 slides, some sensitive images that people may be offended by, but they're very, very common. And I wouldn't say these are out of the ordinary in any shape or form, okay? The first thing is just to show you this. This is from 2018, and this is the number of clinical cases to presented us, you know, a couple of years ago, so just under 160,000 cases. And it was really just to show you there are lots of cases being presented to us, okay? 160,000 cases requiring, as I say, nearly 500,000 treatments being given out. So it's a huge number we are seeing across the board with these animals, a huge, huge number. These aren't isolated at all. And the types of things we see a lot of parasite related conditions. This is a camel with mange that is extremely itchy. They tend to rub themselves raw. They become quite aggressive with it. They'll attack each other because you can imagine itching the whole time. The one in the middle is effectively a fly spread parasite that will infect the area around their eyes and down the nose, and again cause blindness through to kind of gross destruction of the head region. The one on the far right is again associated with internal parasites, internal worms, where when they strain because of the worms, they end up with rectal prolapse. These are very, very typical. I'm not showing you anything that I wouldn't see on a daily basis when we go out to our clinics. So these are typical parasite type of conditions. These are related to the types of harnessing that the animals wear. So when they're working, they invariably wear some kind of harness that will cover their backs, cover their pectorals, their brisket, and their bottom basically. And because they're skinny, because they carry huge loads, because the materials used are inappropriate or badly padded or badly fitting, effectively they rub on the animal. It's like us having a terribly fitting pair of shoes but being forced to wear them, you know, simple as that, without any ability to change the way the shoe fits. And these are very, very typical kind of injuries, and we see them again on a daily basis and are a direct result of the animals working for a living, simple as that. A few more examples. Again, animals, they tend to have straps on the legs. They use hobbles as well, so the animals don't escape at night, for example. And we see again a massive injuries directly resulting from the type of work that they're expected to do, the environment they work with, and again the types of materials that are used on these animals. So again, we see a lot of injuries to the limbs. And remember, these are working animals. So this kind of injury you can see on this particular page, where a hobble, the picture in the middle, has eventually become absolutely embedded in the limb, resulting in chronic long-term change. These animals will still be expected to work after being treated, after this kind of condition. So these animals will continue to work even with these injuries. Poor nutrition, as you can see there, they don't have access to the typical feedstuffs that we do, so we see a lot of issues resulting to poor nutrition and the consequences of that. We see infectious disease that is unique to some of these countries. This one on the left is called African horse disease. The one on the right is enzootic lymphangitis. Again, these are very typical in these particular areas that they work, and they're invariably fatal. And again, this is just a graph showing you the distribution of musculoskeletal injuries, whether that be arthritis, foot problems, muscle problems, joint problems. There's a huge variety of them through every single month of the year. So yeah, these are typical infectious diseases that we see overseas as well, and these again direct things that we see. And this is the last slide we got to, which was again really just to say or show you that the variety, but on the, you know, we see all these things. These are this gives you a graphical view of the numbers of musculoskeletal problems we see in feet and muscles and limbs, etc., that we see across the board through all times of the year. So it's very, very common, all of these things that we're seeing. And on top of this, so we see all these welfare issues. We can assess them academically and look at poverty indexes. And we also see some human aspects to this as well. So again, hopefully this video will work. We did test it in the break. It seemed to. So just to show you this. Really what you'll see, and you'll hear it as well. Yep. Boys there with sticks, and you'll hear the thud as they hit their donkey. You can see the mark starting on the donkey there. Come on, video. I should keep going.
Oh. Do you ever intervene, Ben, when that kind of thing happens? Or
yes, yeah, I do quite a lot. Yeah, quite a lot. And they do listen. People do listen. Invariably, they kind of listen for a little bit and then carry on. Unfortunately, when they get around the corner, but yeah, very much so. So when we have an overriding intersectional weakness, we see, as I've already seen, and you've seen the photos now, and you've seen the academic information, we see poor animal welfare, but we also see poor human behavior with regards to these animals. We see the infectious disease, and it's compounded by lack of national recognition of these animals, so lack of active legislation that surrounds them, compounded by high levels of dependency that people have on these animals, meaning they have to work, as well as other climatic social stressors, etc. And there are other things as well. Clearly, we're all living right now in the midst of coronavirus, and that's had a huge impact upon these animals. As I described to you, these animals are very much used for producing an income for people by going to markets. And invariably across the globe, markets have stopped, you know, through national guidelines saying you can't have people, more than 20 people, for example, and it's meant no markets have occurred, or people, you know, cannot move these animals or use these animals to move around to generate their own income. So they've had the COVID pandemic, or now epidemic, I suppose, has had a huge impact upon people and upon animals. And the video, which unfortunately didn't work earlier, but demonstrates certainly that people, when they earn money, they can afford to feed themselves and they can afford to feed their animal and care for the animal. And when they can't do that, there is a vicious cycle, and these animals become even more dependent upon us. And we also have other global issues that you may or may not have heard of. There is a current global problem called ijao. And now ijao is basically an ingredient. It is a gel that is made from donkey skins. It's dissolved in water or alcohol effectively to make a beauty product. And this beauty product is a panacea for everything. Reduces wrinkles, cures anemia, increases libido, lets you sleep better, stops pregnancy. They've even used it in treating coronavirus, and it has huge impacts. It is non-efficacious in terms there is no medical research demonstrating the positive effects of a gel. And it is largely used in Chinese medicine, Eastern medicine. It is in such high demand, and it is estimated that this is in 2016, about 4.8 million skins are required on top of any Chinese national herds to supply the Chinese market. And what it has is had a global effect where the Chinese have now exhausted their own national herd, and so have accessed African herds, Southern America herds, Latin America herds, resulting in free fall of donkeys overseas. I'm flicking through this a little bit quickly so you can see these things. And what we've seen globally is drops, huge drops in donkey populations in countries where people are hugely dependent upon them to, you know, support themselves. So this again has a global impact upon people for a product which let's face it, is a beauty product with no efficaciousness at all, and has huge impact upon people and also on the welfare of the animals. For some reason, the numbers on the donkey thing didn't come out. Apologies for that.
China depleting the donkey population to make a beauty product.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a little bit of recap. The end of the last 40 minutes was we have millions, quite literally, of invisible workers that aren't recognized, and they're not recognized because of intersectional weaknesses within governments. They are in the hands of the poorest communities in the world whose voices aren't heard, but they have a huge input into the sustainable developmental goals. They have an input into economic output of these people and these countries, and also of social status. So they are vitally important, but very poorly recognised. A few organisations do recognise them, such as ourselves, and we're trying to work and raise the awareness of them, but not many, and that's the mission we're on at the moment. So not many. The good thing to say is you now do, I hope. So you're now part of that growing population, people who understand, the plight of these animals, as well as the people who rely upon them. So, quick recap: working animals are vital in supporting millions of people. Their welfare is haphazard and has no legislative control. Medical care systems, etc., paraprofessionals look after them, are either absent or of extremely low quality. Basic knowledge, whether that's feeding, treating, or providing things such as harnesses, is absent, and they also suffer from huge kind of variations of support, whether that's through climatic, emergency, disaster, infectious disease, etc. So there's a huge reliance upon them. So what do? We effectively do what's called the 3 T's. Basically, we treat animals, we train people, we teach children, and we also react to emergencies, the 3 T's. And as I said, last year we did just under 458,000 treatments for animals. We ran 54 veterinary clinics. We were in about 30 countries. We distributed humane equipment, whether that's bits or pieces of harnessing, etc. And we went into schools and we reached approximately 76,000 children in teaching them about care of the animals. And really, when we're doing those 3 T's, treat, train, teach, we're trying to reach the kind of, if you like, the 4 demographics of people who are involved in these animals, rely on these animals. So we're working with governments and institutions to raise awareness directly in them as to the social and economic importance of these animals. We work with veterinary professionals to increase their understanding of these animals. Many of these animals don't even feature in, for example, a veterinary curriculum at all. We obviously reach the people who completely rely on these animals to educate them so they understand the needs of the animals and how improving assisting them with the needs of those animals will help those peoples in retrospect. And we also reach animal owners and handlers, such as the children, so that we embed long-term knowledge within people to empower them for long-term support of these animals and obviously of themselves as well. And effectively what we have is a hierarchy of activities. When we first go into a country, in the very bottom of that hierarchy, we're providing free veterinary care. We provide emergency responses. We're reacting to the immediate need. Then as we get in, as people trust us, as we develop relationships, we move into schools, we move into communities, and we start to engender knowledge support. So we develop humane education for the children. We develop community understanding of the needs of those animals and how they can best support them, and then how those animals will best support the people. We aid in infrastructure development. So we aid veterinary personnel, we aid technicians, we aid people who are treating people, paraprofessionals, we aid people who will actually train children further. We develop the underlying baseline knowledge of people or key stakeholders within these various areas. We use our research, so the data I showed you, those graphs, we use that to feed back to governments, to feed back to vets, so they can see the kind of problems that are there. So again, we raise that understanding of the types of problems that are there and how they can address them. We then move up another one once we've shared that data, once we get buy-in with all of that data and they can see the issues. We then lobby governments to look at their legislation, say, how can we support these people and these animals? What value is it to us? And then lastly, we hopefully will institute that actual legislation and cultural change across the board. So we end up with more national changes. So there's a kind of hierarchy of steps that we try to engage upon. And when we do the free veterinary care, basically it gives us an in. It gives us a foot in the doorway. It gives us something where we can start treating, start communicating people, and it starts us able to gather data on the typical kind of conditions that we see. So this data is from 2017. It's from Morocco, and you can see that the widespread kind of variety of diseases and the numbers of conditions that we're presented with. And that's very, very important because it allows us to feed that back to those same projects. It allows us us to feed that back to government. It allows us to generate the type of training that we need to concentrate on the more common diseases and upskill people in dealing with them. So it's very important we collect this kind of data and share it with people. And as I say, it defines what we need to do. It defines the kind of treatments that we need to do. It defines what training we need to do. It defines the kind of infrastructural developments we want to support. And it defines also what we know then the communities also need for us to support them. So that data is very important. And it starts with that initial free veterinary care, so we can go into communities, so that we can communicate with them, so that they can trust us and we can learn about the issues that they are presented with. And this, I suppose, is the end result. So in SPANA, we have what we call core countries. These are countries with fixed hospitals, effectively, where animals will arrive and receive treatment on a daily basis. These are pictures from Mauritania. This is in the centre in Nouakchott, with 2 water troughs outside and the clinic with inside. So we run fixed mobile clinics where we can do pretty much as you would expect in any veterinary hospital, you know, in the UK. We also run mobile clinics, so these are just, you know, effectively, you know, a vet in a truck with a technician who will go out to communities and reach people and treat the diseases as they're presented to them. If they need hospitalization, they will be transferred to actually one of the clinics. But again, we're giving direct support to the animals, and whilst we're there, we're also engaging in community support, developing the understanding of the communities to the problems that we're being presented with. We work in various areas with various different types of people, using the animals for different things. The picture on the left is from an area called Smasher Block in South Africa, which is a mining community where the donkeys are used for water. And you can see these brightly coloured harnesses are the typical harnesses we give out to communities and teach them how to make themselves, so then we can reduce the overall wound count on the animals. And on the right is in India. You can clearly see a camel being treated for dehydration through working at the brick kilns, and the type of huge amount of effort they have to put in, pulling quite literally half a ton of bricks to a ton of bricks for industry. We also have smaller projects again across the world. The one on the left is in Tanzania, where the donkeys are used. Because I'm afraid I can't remember the name of the lake. It's called the Mtera Dam, where donkeys are used to collect fish from the fishing boats. On the right from India again, for treating cattle, which again used long term for ploughing fields, etc. So we have a number of projects doing different size work in different communities with different types of problems that we see. And then, as I said, the next tier up is introducing education. Education is across different groups of people. So we introduce veterinary education directly to the professionals that are starting to learn, the undergraduate veterinary students. We upskill government vets, we upskill vets in the field. We work with paraprofessionals such as dentists, harness makers, farriers, etc., to try and upskill those guys. We also directly provide education to children, which I'll come on to in a moment. And we also provide education effectively for communities to improve their knowledge of the animals that they're using directly. This is an example of the kind of typical veterinary student information that we give. So these are what are called clinical skills centres. So these are centres that we set up within the universities globally that are teaching veterinary students first-hand skills in dealing with working animal issues. And again, these are largely not even within their curriculum, and we run these clinics, as you can see there on the left, in various countries globally to try and upskill these students. Alongside this, we provide direct lecture materials by direct demonstrations to the students to again upskill, so that when they're leaving university, they understand the type of issues that they may face. From a children perspective, we provide humane education, and humane education is really trying to link together people with animals and the environment, which is what we know, now is so vital. And there are so many interlinking actions that each of us have with animals, with the environment, that affect us. We're living in a pandemic right now, which is a direct relation of people's expansion into virgin areas, resulting into closer interaction between people and animals. And we know the effect of that, unfortunately. So effectively, humane education is nurturing compassion and respect for all living things, people, animal, and the environment, and emphasizing that interconnectedness between all three. It is rooted in constructive pedagogy, which basically just means we're trying to use modern techniques of learning. So we're trying to use direct theoretical learning as well as cognitive skills, such as thinking skills, as well as pattern behavior through songs and dancing, all kinds of different things. We're trying to approach it in all kinds of different ways so that we can develop the understanding in children and young people to really enhance the learning that they can achieve of that interrelatedness, so that we encourage long-term behavioral change. And these are just photos from around the various places where we work. The picture of the lady in the middle is in Zimbabwe. Her name is Hermione, and she runs a series of humane education lectures in a clinical a center just outside Harare, the capital. And again, this is her just teaching the children. We also bring children into some of our veterinary clinics to actually handle the animals. Some of the kids, are frightened of these animals, so we get them to handle them, we get them to understand it. You can see the little girl there in the bottom right with a picture book. We provide stories so they can read and learn about all of these kind of different aspects of education. I think this is the last video. I hope this will work. And this is a little girl from Botswana. And again, this is her after she's received some humane education. Do people want to stick with it, or is it too annoying?
Yeah, it's very moving.
Should I stop it?
No, leave it.
It's good.
Okay.
Yes, cool. Uniform.
Okay. I'm afraid the for some reason the video and the sound was kind of out of sync, but I guess we get the gist. I hope at least anyway. So yeah. I think that's a really nice little film from her. And you know, she was wearing her school uniform, and I think, you know, that's equally kind of important to point out. The fact that they had donkeys enabled her to go to school, to actually learn about donkeys and learn about the relevance of them. So it's, you know, a nice little circle there for them. So yeah, we provide humane education for children who rely on these animals for their family and their family's income. As I mentioned before, we also work with communities directly to actually train them with the problems that we know they have. There are a number of topics we cover, everything from harnessing, basic welfare, feeding, care of the hooves, etc. There are a whole variety of things. The pictures of the ladies there is in Tanzania, where we train ladies in the community to upskill them and become what are called community animal healthcare workers. And these ladies are specialized, have specialized skills through that training to actually then go out into the communities and provide knowledge and treatment for donkeys in the communities, so they actually generate an income themselves through that skill acquisition. So again, that's a kind of, you know, a development of community training that is enabling them to have a long-term income, as well as supporting the animals that support those very same communities. Almost lastly, we also respond to emergencies. Obviously, things happen. We know that, you know, this year alone, there's been droughts in Zimbabwe, in Botswana. There's also been flooding. There's been flooding in Mauritania and in Ghana. And so what we try and do is respond directly to emergencies, such as this one in Turkana in northern Kenya, where there was a huge drought, or a very serious drought, for about 3 years. And we provided solar-powered boreholes that reached over 15,000 animals and 4,000 people, and it's solar-powered. And we also provided direct skill training for the people so that they could continue to maintain that borehole. So again, it can be maintained for years to come. So it's a community management system set up for that. We've also responded, as I say, to various things like flooding. Odisha was this year in India, in northern India, where a cyclone hit, destroyed many of the kind of basic infrastructural services that were there. So again, we went in and provided basic care to the animals in that area, as well as providing ongoing support for the people relying upon them. We also work to try to prevent or reduce risk in future. So again, in drought-ridden areas, we will work and provide water troughs or solar-powered boreholes. Where there's flooding, we will work to provide basic flooding prevention and shelters for those animals when they come around again. So we try and reduce the risks, not just react to emergencies as they occur. In COVID, as we mentioned earlier, with the situation where people can quite literally afford to feed the animals, we've run COVID feeding programs this year in, I think it's 6 countries now, feeding, you know, several hundred tons of food to animals that otherwise wouldn't have any feeding. So we did that as well this year as a direct result. And as I've mentioned before, in that hierarchy, we also work from a position with regards to donkey skins, but also changing legislation to try and lobby governments to understand the impact these animals have on the people who rely upon them and upon the country's infrastructure as a whole. So we work and we try and legislate governments. We provide policy briefs. We work with them to actually update them, to encourage them to change things, to encourage them to enforce any legislation that is there. So we work alongside a number of different groups, but to raise awareness. This one's specifically about donkey skin, but we do it across the board for many of the problems that we see. So we also work from that advocacy sense, approaching that way. That particular action on donkey skins has resulted in good responses. We have, because of lobbying, because of production of policy briefs, because of production of the data showing the impact of the loss of these populations on people, we have managed to develop or have governments ban actually the export of donkeys and their donkey products in a number of countries. You can see there, I think it's 17. But, you know, there's still work to be done, certainly, you know, and there's lots of work to be done still on that respect. And we know still, you know, donkey populations are falling. So there is still activities that we need to undertake. And we hope that going through this process by providing free treatment, by getting long-term understanding of the plight of these animals by the governments and by the people, by training them, providing infrastructure, by lobbying for legislative change and for enforcement of that change, we hope that long-term we get transformation. We hope that we get long-term sustainability within those countries where people understand that the impact and the importance of these animals, and so set themselves up to care for them and allow those animals then to care for those people exactly at the same time. So we hope long term that it transforms populations. I think that's it. I was kind of very aware of my time this time around, so I may have gone a little bit too quick there actually. Hopefully I've covered as much as I can in that period of time. I think we're going to meet for questions shortly, I believe, Peter, but happy to take any questions or comments at all. So.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you. That has been so informative, so moving. I've learned so much, and I'm sure everyone watching feels the same as well. And there's one or two comments here. There's from Smita. Smita is a regular attender. She's a member of the Jain community in Leicester. And she says that, you know, we'd love you to come to Leicester when we're able to do that again. And it would be great to have you speak to not just the Jain community, but others. And it's just really brought home to me how dependent we are, even us here, because like you said, the coffee we've just drank in our break has been, you know, carried by donkeys. And it's just, everything that you're doing is absolutely fantastic. Thank you very, very much.
That's quite all right.
Does anybody want to chip in with a question for Ben or a comment? Someone has said a real eye-opener, thanks. I think we're all quite stunned. Yeah, I should definitely watch this on the YouTube, and
hopefully we can get the videos
note down somebody. Yeah, we might need
the videos
to.
Working a bit better. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, we can work. Yeah, so. Pete will be able to work on that with you. Yeah. Can you tell us? Well, I mean, if anyone wants to interrupt me, anybody, if you want to ask something, but could you tell us just a little bit about how SPANA started?
Yeah, so you're right. We gave a talk, or you gave the talk, Patricia, 20 years ago. SPANA's been around since 1923. It was started by a mother and daughter, the Hassalis, who effectively started it in Algeria when they were traveling at that time, and effectively, similar to I've been describing to you, saw the plight of many animals at that time, largely working equids at that time. And they set up effectively a charity, which was to directly support animals in Northern Africa. And from that 1923, it's grown since. So yeah, we'll be 100 years old in 2 years, basically. It's been around a long time. It's always had the 3 T's as its very much its tenant, I suppose, where we certainly believe that providing treatments for these animals, then introducing training and teaching gives us that base ability to have a long-term impact on the lives of these people by influencing the people who rely upon them whilst actually helping the animals directly. And the two are very closely linked. If we help the animals, they help the people. If we help the people, they help the animals. It's a win-win situation.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, I suppose partly in my mind, I'm kind of thinking that your role is to gradually eliminate the use of animals because of such cruelty that's involved. But I can see it differently now, and I guess it's going to be many, many, many years, and maybe we need to learn, don't we, to work alongside each other, human beings and animals.
That's a very good point, and people often ask me
that we can make a better.
it's a very good point. People often ask me, why don't we just kind of buy tractors and things like that, you know? And, you know, the simple thing to say is, you know,
it's
for the
not
people,
just people who are kind of animal rightsists, it's everybody has to, you know, needs to get this on board, don't they?
Yeah. Sorry, Patricia, I jumped in there before you finished. So yeah, there's kind of, if you like, a couple of, you know, different sides to the argument. You know, one argument is saying, well, we should just buy tractors, buy trucks, buy tuk-tuks instead of using these animals as taxis. The simple thing to say is people can't afford to purchase these things, and they can't afford to maintain these pieces of machinery. There's multiple instances of people trying to buy a combine harvester and it just rots by the side of a field, and people are forced into using working animals. I think I very much view it as these animals have a role to play. We know they have a wider impact, for example, on the SDGs. We know that they are more efficient than a tractor, they have less environmental damage, etc. What I very much think of, and I hope, you know, all of us experience this in our lives to some degree, is we all need to work. We all work, but we hope that when we work, we are in a working environment that is not injurious to us, or if we are injured, we are looked after in that process. And I very much see the working animal in that kind of sphere. Really, is that they have to work because people are reliant upon these animals, and without them, we know that descent into poverty and other aspects is very, very rapid. So what we need to do is support these animals whilst these people are working, and we need to support the long-term change to empower the people, to improve their income, to improve their status. Yes, eventually there will be less animals required, but we're, if you like, a little bit of a stopgap in that of supporting that process whilst it's happening. So in some countries, we have started to withdraw because we recognize we have actually had those effects. So for example, we have started to withdraw some of our services in Jordan. We've withdrawn slightly from northern Tunisia, where we know that the economic change has occurred. We know that the welfare issues are less significant. We know that we have trained personnel now within those areas. We know that legislation has improved, so those animals have more support. So we can start to withdraw and again empower and allow effectively local people and national governance to actually look after these animals and develop them. So that's always our aim, is to have that long-term withdrawal. But in the interim, we've got to support them as best we can. As I say, similar to us in a workplace where we need to actually, you know, ensure that we have the appropriate support for ourselves, and if we are injured or whatever, then, you know, we can get appropriate treatment as the need arises.
Is there anyone else that would like to ask Ben something, make a comment?
Hello, it's Robert here.
Robert.
Okay, so there's sorry, Robert, did you want to? Yeah.
Yeah. I wondered what the main source of funding was, and how involved are our government and foreign governments in providing support for the organisation.
It's entirely donor-led, Robert. There's no UK government assistance at all. We do get some assistance overseas. Again, it's all donor-led rather than national governance that come in. So, for example, some of the COVID feeding programs that we did this year, we received overseas assistance from Australia, from Canada, and also from in-country like Morocco. So we received donors' money. So it's all voluntary donations, I have to say. None of it's from governments or from corporates, etc. We do apply to governments, I have to say. You know, we've tried to, historically, it doesn't exist anymore, appeal to DFID, for example, for funding. We haven't got it, I have to say, but, you know, we have tried to apply from it. So it's all totally voluntary donations that the charities existed on. So.
Oh, thank you.
And then
sorry, it does occur to me that you're doing a great job, and yet I've never heard of the organisation before. Yeah. So that rather surprises me.
Yeah, no, thank you, Robert. You know, I appreciate that. I think our name's not the best, I have to say. SPANA stands for Society for Protection of Animals Abroad. I think it's a bit of a mouthful, and I think partly our name doesn't do us any favours, actually, and we are in the process of probably updating it in the next couple of years to hopefully make it a little bit easier. So maybe we'll get in the media a little bit easier. So, but yeah, thank you for that comment, Robert. Anthony, sorry, I do apologise.
From India. It was, yes, it was something about rural communities. You know, it's just, you just made it was just so brilliant the way it showed people that, you know, everything, all our climate change practices and everything, it's all dependent on the way we work with our animals. And also, you know, as you say about disease, you know, the viruses and I mean, when you showed the picture that greets you at the market and that, and there's just, you know, just animals and people all crowded up together. And
yeah, as I say, none of those are.
It's absolutely.
Yeah, none of those are untypical as well. They're very, very. You know, that's what every day. You know, every day you go out. You know, and you know, quite literally, you know, you'll open the back of your truck at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you just keep working until you run out of stuff, basically. You know, simple as that. You know, and it's just that's how it is. You know, so yeah, it's incredible the numbers that are just really, just dependent, as I say, or you know, requiring help. So.
And I know that Peter, you know, the People for Ethical Treatment of Animals group, I know they support similar clinics, I think, in India. I don't know whether Anthony will come across them. Do you actually work in India?
Yes, so we have 3 main projects in India. 2 of them are veterinary, and 1 is a children's education project. The children's education is linked to the veterinary project. So I'm just trying to remember the name of the regions. I'm afraid I can't quite remember the name of the regions. There's one fairly central and one a little bit further north. So in India, we work with camels exclusively in one region, where they are involved in the brick kiln industry, basically, and they suffer a lot from basically work-related illnesses, which is, you know, pulling quite literally tons of bricks from the brick kilns, the harness injuries that they have, and foot problems from working in the kind of just difficult terrain, basically, that we see. And then further north, we work almost exclusively with oxen, who are used for just for agricultural uses, basically. And in that more northern in the camel project, whilst working with camels, we also do a lot of community training as well to upskill people with regards to harnesses and how to use camels and care for them in those environments. And in the north, where we're treating oxen, we're working with school children in that area to again try and support that long-term underlying understanding of general care of animals and the environment to again lead that longer term empowerment of the people to look after themselves and their animals. So and also we've responded to emergencies in India. I mentioned the cyclone that was there earlier this year. We responded to that, where a cyclone came through the northern area and kind of destroyed, you know, masses, a huge raft of the country. So we had a vet team go in there and, you know, assist with the animals and the kind of effectively clear up situation of that. Animals again suffer like people. When there's a disaster, you see things like typhoid and tetanus and all these kind of things, you know, breaking out in people. You get very similar circumstances in animals, but very rarely do you see anybody really reacting to that. So.
Yeah, that's one of the most shocking things, isn't it, to read that there is absolutely no financial help from any government.
It's a very interesting one. Yeah, I think it's, as I say, I mean,
I'm sorry, I was just going to say, you have withdrawn, you said, from Tunisia and what was the other one?
Jordan, yeah.
Jordan, yeah. So presumably they are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's an interesting one. Countries do have in place welfare laws, but invariably they base their welfare laws on effectively their GDP. So animals that provide a direct income for a government will receive legislative care. So, for example, cattle, chickens, sheep, for example, pigs, where they're producing beef or wool or bacon, you know, those kind of produces that a country will export and make a direct tariff on, they tend to have welfare legislation and enforcement to encourage that. So, for example, when we had foot and mouth outbreak years ago, the reason we reacted so strongly is because it would affect the UK's export market, because countries wouldn't import our beef or our cattle products if there was a risk of them getting foot and mouth disease. So they were in this legislative fold where we would support those animals. And that's what happens in developmental countries. The animals that make the government money, they will support. But very often these working animals don't make the government direct money. So we don't sell, for example, horse meat. We don't sell, the products from horses, etc., around the world, or at least from these countries. So because of that, they're not part of the country's overall GDP, and that's why they don't receive direct support. However, the argument is that these animals provide so much support for the people who are reliant upon them. Effectively, that is actually GDP support, because without it, people wouldn't have money to spend, quite literally in some circumstances. So actually they do that, but it's a very hard measure to do. It's very hard to go into a village or a community and say, tell me how much money you make from these animals. Tell me how much money you spend, buying, food or clothing or something like that. It's very, very hard to actually do those calculations. And it's only really within the last 10 years and with the advent of these SDGs that the impact and the importance of these animals is becoming more obvious to governments. And that's what we're really trying to push. And that's why, where it has occurred, like in Jordan, like in Tunisia, where there is recognition of them, they put in laws. Vets then get employed to look after these animals. You start getting this cycle of care for animals, and then we can start to withdraw our services, knowing that there is support left behind for them.
So does that include government finance, or is it still mainly on people's donations?
Sorry, so when we withdraw, it's because the government itself has set up situations to look after these animals. So invariably, when we're running veterinary clinics, apart from sharing our data, we will actually invite government vets and government officials to come with us on our clinics, and in some cases we insist upon it. And what all we're trying to do is just trying to open their eyes and say, look, we're turning up in Mali, we're presented with 1,000 horses. Every single one of these horses is earning money for people. This is why they're important for your people, for your government, because without them, people won't earn. So it's one of those where we start, it's very much we pay, but then long term, again, we're trying to get that government buy-in to say, okay, we understand the importance of these. Let's put some government money into supporting these animals. And that's across the board. That's from everything from children's education, the same as us. You go to school, you pass your O-levels, you go to university, you learn to become a vet or a doctor or a farrier or a dentist. It goes across the board then, where you start generating, the surrounding infrastructure that looks after these animals. We don't have a working animal in this country, or we probably have 10 or 20, something like that, extremely small numbers. But yet, we have equine hospitals, horse vets, we have people who are dedicated to the horse industry. They're not working animals, but the government recognizes the value of these animals to the general public, very much as a plaything, I have to say. But the government knows, this is income for us, and therefore we need to look after them. The better we look after them, the more people will use them, and it's a healthy circle. I think again in foot and mouth, when, for example, racing was cancelled almost for the year, the impact on the UK GDP was huge. It's something like 5-10 billion pounds a year is created through UK racing, and it's huge numbers we're talking about. I'm not trying to say we're going to start racing in Ethiopia, but that's the theory. We want to create an infrastructure around animals and working animals that allows them to live a normal life and to support people.
Gosh, you must have a lot to think about, Ben, when you get into bed
Sometimes.
at night.
Yeah. So.
What were you going to say? Were you going to say something?
I think we've lost Anthony.
Here
we go. From Anthony. How can we prepare our children to teach them? Do you not get support from United Nations? From Anthony. Here in India, we have Friends of Livestock, but only based on veterinary treatment. Thank you. I don't know if you'll...
Maybe I could give you Anthony's email address?
Yeah, that might be
and
easier. Yeah, I mean,
or give him yours, and you could
yeah,
get
of
in
course.
touch. It'd be great
Yeah, for the
if you had
people
anyone.
here, you know, how we work in communities is it's you know, probably the same as anywhere else in the world. What we try and do in communities, if we don't have a veterinary program there, as I say, our normal footstep in the doorway is through veterinary care, where we turn up and we provide free treatments, and that invariably gets communities interested. You know, simple as that. And then we learn about the community, we learn the kind of problems that they face. And basically what we do then, we reach out to the key members of that community. It slightly depends on where you are in the world. Sometimes they're very patriarchal, sometimes they're matriarchal, sometimes they will have chiefs of communities, sometimes they will have what are called hosies, which are effectively chiefs of communities. And you simply go and talk to them and you say, you know, we are here, this is what we do, this is our capacity, we're here to care for your animals, we're here to provide you with knowledge and skills and upskill you, you know, would you be interested in us coming here? Invariably the answer is yes. You know, sometimes we have to bribe them, you know, and I'm not saying financially, but when we hold our first meetings, we will provide tea and biscuits, and sometimes we will provide anti-parasite treatments for any animals that are brought, for example. But then we start doing some very basic community engagement with them, and we talk to them about the problems they face. We talk to them about the problems we have found in their animals, and what we then try and do is actually marry the two together. So we try and understand the problems the community faces, which could be, you know, our animals get really skinny, you know, and they die in a drought period. And we talk about what we found. We may say, yeah, actually we found, you know, your animals have a very low body condition score. We found more wounds upon them because they have less muscle mass, so they end up becoming injured by the actual work they do. So then we talk to them about what feeding is actually needed for a working animal, how to do harness care, and how to do wound care on those. But also we add into that agriculture, so how to actually plow a field, how to plant, how to water. And it's maybe sound extremely basic, but sometimes that is all you need to do. Get people to understand that kind of micro culture behind what's going on. And we talked about how to preserve foods as well. So for example, it sounds crazy, but there's a lot of waste. There's a lot of waste in this country. If we think about, I don't know, a cauliflower, we all throw away the leaves of a cauliflower. They do the same thing, you know, in developmental countries. But just saying you can preserve these fodders, these byproducts of what you use on a routine basis to feed animals. If you are cutting down, for example, sweet corn, often the stalks of the sweet corn is thrown away, but if you put it on top of your building, cover it, you're actually creating a preserved food that can be used in the winter period and the drought periods. So it's a marrying of the two aspects of what you do. So it's understanding the problems they face, trying to present to them your link to that, and then trying to work out a communal reaction to it, to try and address those particular issues. So that's how we do it. We'll go in with free veterinary treatment. We'll link with the key stakeholders within that group. We'll then engage in community meetings and actually really properly engage with them and get feedback with them. And then we'll get ideas of how to help them with that. Sometimes we'll directly fund certain activities. So for example, if we know that the majority of their problems are caused by poor harnessing, for example, or poor foot care, we'll actually train specific members of that community to make harnesses properly, or to undertake farriery, and we'll provide them with equipment to do that, as long as those people then share those skills. But again, it provides, if you like, a cottage industry to start growing in these areas, for allowing them to actually develop an income for them to, again, achieve that longer term growth. With regards to the children specifically, if there aren't schools, we will run clubs, effectively. They're called PAWS clubs, which is promoting animal welfare. They're called PAWS clubs, basically. And all we do is we teach, again, local stakeholders or local teachers in humane education. We actually have a curriculum of lessons, 20 lessons that we produce, with the books that you saw that people can use to actually teach children. We employ what are called humane education officers within country to actually go to these communities and hold a lesson once a week with the children in those communities or within schools, to actually, you know, give them that information. And again, like that little video at the end, I know it didn't work particularly well, but that's the kind of feedback you get back from a children who is otherwise only ever thought of a working animal as a working animal. It's never thought of it as having a personality or any needs. It's just there to collect the wood and the water, nothing else. But actually, when you start getting them to understand the links between themselves and the animal and the environment and how each of them interact, that's when you get, you know, real personal engagement with that animal and personal growth in the person. And interestingly, the kids go back and tell their parents off. They say, you can't hit the donkey, you know, you have to feed it, you have to, you know, give it time off. You can't work it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when it's 40-degree heat. You've got to give it shelter. You know, this is where the whole cycle comes together. So
yeah, education is crucial, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you think that would be instinctive, wouldn't you, in people? But I guess everyone's conditioned by how other people behave. So if their parents behave in that way, then they're
absolutely right. And it's
hard to know where.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Conditioning.
I'm always amazed by that. And I think, you know, we're very much, you know, as a child in this country, you're brought up reading the Just So stories, or you're brought up reading Winnie the Pooh, and, you know, we automatically start to have links with animals, you know, or links with these, you know, bears and rabbits, and, you know, and we start to just have those very basic, gentle links. At school, we're taught in a rational manner in terms of, you know, if you feed and water something, it will grow, it will live. You know, so many of these children have zero access to books. So many of these children have zero access to education. So those very basic, you know, very young, informative year, you know, strands of knowledge never occur within them. You know, so they just don't have those real basic things. We just go, that's incredible. You know, why not? You know, but they almost live in this vacuum of ability to educate themselves. Yeah, and it's remarkable. I have to say, it's absolutely remarkable. I find it incredible that these very basic knowledge, these little packets of knowledge, people don't have. Simple as that. People really just don't have them. And I think equally, you have to look at it from their perspective. Well, you mentioned the word cruelty, Patricia. There are cruel people, don't get me wrong. There are cruel people in the UK, there are cruel people the world over. But a lot of the cruelty, in inverted commas, is innately linked to need. You know, if that animal doesn't work, they don't eat, full stop. You know, so hitting the animal, making it work, making it walk, you know, the 10 kilometers to collect water is, you know, an act of survival, you know, whether it's cruel or not, you know. And that's, again, the environment we're working within, where we're saying we understand that, you know, we're not here to stop you using your working animal. We're here to support you using that working animal, so that animal works in a better way, so that it isn't a more efficient worker, so that it actually produces more for you. And that's again, that underlying message that we're trying to do. We're not trying to say, no, we're going to replace it with a tractor. You know, we understand the need that is there within that country.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Probably banging the drum now.
Yeah. Yeah, well, there's, huge issues, aren't there? Huge issues. Smita has said, so you do not get support from United Nations? I presume not, because you would have mentioned that, wouldn't you?
No, absolutely. No, we don't. Yeah.
And you said that you hadn't had any response from our Department for Overseas Development, which doesn't exist now, as we know. So yeah, there's a huge lot to be done here.
You know, I kind of use the term invisible workforce. Again, you know, really when we think of DFID and the UN, you know, to an extent, we think of them supporting European causes. As I say, this is very much an invisible workforce. You know, we don't have the financial figures behind it to say this is how much a working animal directly inputs into a country's finances. I think, you know, countries would sit up and take a lot more notice if they did that, similar to the racing example I gave earlier. But yeah, we don't get direct support from the UN, but we appeal to the UN to include working animals as, you know, a singular part of their sustainable development goals. You know, all we can do is demonstrate to them how working animals impact upon sustainable development goals. And if we support working animals, we're far more likely to reach those goals that they've set out for 2030. But direct financial support, no, not at all. But the UN can have influence upon those sustainable development goals, which is why we work with them and try and appeal to them using those examples I gave earlier. So.
Yeah, well, I've heard many a talk on the sustainable goals, but I don't recall the working animal aspect coming into it at all. I mean, I think I just love that presentation. I don't know whether you would, whether that's on your website, is it, or whether you'd be
we have
to share that?
I think it's just one page on our website which examples how working animals link to sustainable development goals. Just one page. I think any longer it probably gets a bit too unwieldy, but yeah, there is a page on the website that does that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
I also wrote a chapter in a book recently that isn't published yet, I have to say, but it's a chapter almost entirely devoted to how working animals support the sustainable development goals, which should be out, I can't remember now, this or next year sometime. Actually, it's generally called One Health, is what I was describing today, how people, animals and environment are very, very closely linked, and how different professions, whether they be vets or people working in government or teachers or anybody along those ills, how we all link together and all are involved in this improvement of the global health, not just animal health, but human health and environmental health. They're all innately linked together. So the book is related to that, but I wrote one specifically on working animals and sustainable development goals. So.